Hi, welcome to Spooktober here at Medfield TV. I'm Mike Paige, and today we're going to be carving a pumpkin. And instead of doing the traditional stab cuts all the way through the pumpkin, I'm going to be doing a three-dimensional face. Typically, for a portrait like this, I would want to be using some carving tools like these. However, I'm going to stick almost entirely to a pocket knife today because I'm sure you have one of these at home. If you don't have a pocket knife, you could always just use a paring knife from the kitchen and you'll still be able to make these cuts. Please proceed with caution. Always make sure that the knife is moving away from your non-cutting hand, especially this thumb. If you're right-handed, your left thumb might get in the way without you realizing. Always be mindful of where your other hand is. Thank you. So I said I'm going to stick to the pocket knife, but this pumpkin is actually concave, so I'm going to start with this scraper here. Actually, I might need the pocket knife to get it started. All right, this pocket knife actually will be a little easier for this. This is a very thick rinded pumpkin. I mentioned to be careful that you're always cutting away from your non-cutting hand. You'll notice that my thumb is behind the knife. If my thumb is behind it, I can't accidentally cut it. Even still, I know some of my friends and coworkers have watched me carving before and they get really nervous watching me do it because they're positive I'm going to slip. When I'm wood carving, I will use a carving glove to protect my left hand. But for pumpkin carving, it doesn't work quite as well. And I would definitely have to wash the glove very well afterwards because it gets all that pumpkin slime all over it. So basically, if you're doing a carved portrait in a pumpkin, you just want to prepare the space first, get all the solid orange off. All right, I finally got it kind of ready to go here. We've got a roughed out area for a face to begin. Might get a little more up at the top here. Make sure I've got plenty of space for the face to go in. I chose this pumpkin because it's kind of the rejected pumpkin that I figured nobody wanted. All of the other pumpkins at the farm that I went to were very round, very perfect. This was the one that was laying on its side. Doesn't want to stand up, it's very flat down here. It's perfect to me. There's no such thing as a bad pumpkin. So let's see, I'm gonna start with the nose probably right about here. And for this I'm going to do what is called a stop cut. So the knife is essentially going straight in to the pumpkin. So for this part I can almost draw what I'm envisioning. Then I'm going to undercut that right here, right up to the stop cut, and pop this chunk out. Now, right now, it doesn't look like much of a nose, but this will be the bottom of the nose. And we'll have a mouth start to form underneath. Next, I would usually skip this for a little bit longer, but I'm going to go ahead and do it so you can kind of see a face start to take shape. I kind of drew the sides of the nose. And then same thing, I'm going to come in from the sides here to scoop that out. And I'm starting very shallow. I don't want to start with super deep cuts right off the bat because you want to be able to adjust things as you go if you want. Hopefully the camera's picking up some of the change in depth there. Now, normally I would also be kind of standing up and moving around the pumpkin as I work. This is going to be quite a challenge trying to stay seated, so we'll see whether I actually stay sitting the whole time or if I say forget it and I stand up and work. So again, these cuts are, the initial cut is going straight in, and it's almost like you're drawing the nose. And then I'm doing a few push cuts where my thumb is applying the force, and then I'm coming in to remove the area next to my cut. One of the things that's really cool about working with pumpkins, or any squash really, I really like working with butternut squash. They're a lot of fun to carve. But as you work, it's almost like they're sweating, and that sweat is actually kind of it's like when you bleed, and then it forms a scab. So if you let this sit for a couple hours, what looks like sweat now will actually start to dry up and kind of scab over on the pumpkin. Next I'm making the eye socket area. So it's kind of a rainbow shape. And then again, sort of undercut that whole area. And again, there are fancier tools to be doing this with, but a pocket knife or a paring knife will work. You just might not be able to get in quite as much detail towards the end. But there's nothing wrong with doing it with a pocket knife. Alright, now I'm going to start to draw the eye. I'm going to have this eye very large, almost like a, what is that guy's name? From Young Frankenstein. He played Igor. I'm blanking on his name now. But I want a huge bulging eye like that. Young Frankenstein is one of the movies that I love watching every year. Find that movie never gets old. I'm going to cut a circle. This part gets kind of tricky with a pocket knife because you're trying to make a circle going straight into the pumpkin. Come around to make that next cut. If you're doing this at home, you can be standing to work on it if it's easier. Still trying to think of the name of the guy that played Igor in Young Frankenstein. It's going to bother me now. I'm going to give him an eyelid. I made the nose a little thinner than I want because what I will ultimately do is come in here and make a cut, sort of beveling this edge here. So really it would have been better had I started with the nose a little bit wider than I did. But when you are carving away, you can't add things back on. So I have to live with the choices that I have made and just keep going from there. The way this pumpkin is naturally, it's almost like he's got a big cheekbone right here, so I think I will leave that bit of a bulge there. And we'll make another very large bulging eye. I was considering having him with one eye open and one eye shut, like he's just waking up from a bump in the night. Since it's a sideways pumpkin like this that does not want to sit flat, but I think I'm going to make both eyes open. These eyes are a little goofier than I would have liked. I'm trying not to block this camera that's over the shoulder here. But also looking from this way, it looks like the eyes are lining up, but now that I'm seeing it from the front, this eye is angled down more. I apologize for that. I'm not sure I'll be able to fix that much. I suppose I could try to adjust this eye a little bit, but I think I will mostly have to live with what I already did. When you're carving three-dimensionally like this, it usually helps to do take little bits off at a time. Don't do anything too drastic right off the bat. Just kind of lightly bevel things and see where you're at, and then come back. And you can always take more off, but you can't put it back in. Alright, so now I want to make sure that the eyes are kind of looking the same direction. If you've never tried carving a pumpkin three-dimensionally, I highly recommend giving it a shot. You could always start with butternut squash or even a sweet potato first. No matter what you're carving, whether it's a squash or a sweet potato or whatever, when you're done, the fun thing with doing it this way is you can actually pickle them. So if you stick them in a large enough jar to hold them, pour in some white vinegar, and it will preserve the pumpkin as it is for quite a while. The only trick is that every now and then you have to replace the vinegar with fresh vinegar. But you can preserve them quite a long time that way. And you don't have to worry about them rotting away. There are a couple guys that do this sort of year-round pretty much. Ray Villafane has made a career off of carving pumpkins, which is incredible. Dean Arnold and Andy Bergholtz are two guys that have worked with Ray Villafane. They also have made a, entire career out of sculpting. Andy Bergholtz does other stuff, like I know he has designed toys and stuff as well. But Ray Villafane and Dean Arnold largely work with squash, and have made a career out of it, which is pretty awesome. So if you're a kid out there watching, when your parents say don't play with your food, sometimes it's not a hard and fast rule. Sometimes it's fun. Butternut squash and sweet potatoes are two foods that I do not enjoy at all in terms of eating them, but I absolutely love carving both of them. Try to adjust this nose a little bit now. I don't love the shape that I had made it to start. You can actually crazy glue an additional piece of pumpkin on. So if you have two pumpkins and you want to have a nose that really sticks out, sounds ridiculous, but you can either take a piece from the back of your pumpkin and get a good chunk, or you can take a second pumpkin and sacrifice part of it, and then you can put a toothpick right here, take that chunk and actually crazy glue it on, and then carve the entire thing. That works pretty well, and then you get to add to the pumpkin. Before I said you can't add to it, you can only take away, which is not always true. If you crazy glue a chunk on, you get to add to your pumpkin. And then you can have a crazy, like, big W.C. Fields nose or Pinocchio nose, and people will wonder how your pumpkin has such a bulbous nose up to it. I'll be honest, I'm not loving the way this pumpkin is coming out. He's got some odd concave parts, like there was a concave line coming right through it, and it's definitely adding to the challenge of how to get the knife into those spots. I think I'm going to have his mouth kind of way over here and looking unimpressed. Something like that. And then I'm just going to cut out a very thin sliver where the lips meet to start. Because this way I can decide how much I want to sort of sculpt the lips out of it and how much I want to just leave it. Like you really could leave it just like that and put a slight dimple here under the lip. This is going to be a tricky cut to make without taking too much off. I'm going to try to make kind of a V cut right here, which essentially, instead of a stop cut going straight in, a V cut is two stop cuts made to make a V. Next I'm going to make the sort of wrinkle lines that go from the nose down to the mouth by the cheek. And I'll make the other one like this. Oh, there's a really soft spot right there too. This pumpkin has mostly been a bit tougher than most pumpkins. But you always have to be careful, because if you hit a soft spot, you've got to be ready for it. Next I'm going to make, I wish I knew all the words to facial anatomy better, because this thing here has a name and I don't remember what it is. When I was taking all of those art classes where we had to draw portraits, Probably could have told you what this was called, but the little thing right underneath your nose, that little dimple there. Now, if I was using all of the other sculpting tools by now, I definitely would have switched to start getting into some more of the detailing tools. But I'm going to try to stick with this pocket knife the whole way through. Because that way, if that's what you've got at home, you'll know it is possible to do. I'm going to put some wrinkle lines going across the forehead. I think that carving pumpkins is like one of the most relaxing things of the entire year. It's just a fun activity. There's no stress to get it done. I mean, I guess if you wait until October 30th, there's a little bit of stress to get it done, but it's one of those things that's just a throwback to childhood, and it's a fun activity, and there's no pressure to it. I'm realizing that I just cut that furrowed brow line in, but I really should have added a bit more depth right here first. Whoops. I definitely want the forehead kind of coming back a bit more from the brow. Okay, now I'm going to have to switch to that tool for this part because the knife does not want to get into that concave part. If you have a more round pumpkin, you won't have to worry about that. This pumpkin has a lot of concave features to it. Another thing I like to do with pumpkins, especially if I make the mouth kind of like this, don't be afraid to stick a toothpick in his mouth or something. You can add, I don't want to call it a prop, but you can certainly add things that aren't pumpkin to your pumpkin to give it more human traits and personality. And a toothpick is one of those things that, you picture the old guys that you knew growing up that chewed on a toothpick. A toothpick is one of those things that definitely gives a lot of character and personality and kind of backstory, because it's a very specific kind of guy that chomps on a toothpick. But don't be afraid to give your pumpkin something additional to dress it up a bit. I don't have any toothpicks on me, but I do feel like this is definitely a pumpkin that would get me. Marty Feldman eyes, that's what I knew it would come to me when I wasn't trying to think of it. I wanted big bulging eyes like Marty Feldman's from Young Frankenstein. I also want to make this area in the brow kind of in between the eyeball and the eyebrow area. I want to make that a bit deeper. And when you're carving a pumpkin this way, so when you're cutting all the way through it to make a jack-o'-lantern, you want to go all the way through. When you're working this way, you're trying to avoid cutting all the way through it. So you have to be careful as you go. If you feel like you're getting in too deep into the pumpkin, stop cutting. Don't go any deeper. If you think you're getting in too far, you probably are, and you have no way of knowing how thick the pumpkin's skin is until you have gone too far. And then you know exactly how thick. The way the pumpkin is shaped, his nose is almost concave, which is kind of funny. It's kind of flat from the side, which isn't ideal. Like, again, if you wanted to, you could crazy glue additional pumpkin there to have the nose sticking out. There's not a whole lot I can do about this situation except for try to cut back this part a little bit so that the nose is a little less flat. I'm trying to recess these eyelids a little bit more to really pop those eyeballs. Make them a little cartoonishly big. I am going to use this tool real quick, wherever the camera is. That might be a little too big. Just to make the pupil, I'm going to pop that into the iris area there and twist it. It's almost like a melon baller when you go that way. Whoops. Trying to do that with the pocket knife would have been really tricky. Just trying to get enough depth in there and going all the way around. It is possible. One other thing that you can do is poke the pocket knife or paring knife straight in and very carefully twist in a circle, which sometimes works and sometimes kind of tears at the pulp of the pumpkin, which is why I opted for the other tool there. It's definitely weird sitting to carve a pumpkin. If you're doing it at home, I highly recommend standing. You can really kind of work your way around the pumpkin. You can twist the pumpkin whatever way you need to. I'm trying to keep the pumpkin relatively still so I'm not moving it all over the place where you guys can't see what I'm doing. But I highly recommend standing and working around the pumpkin. And again, if you've never tried doing a pumpkin three-dimensionally, try it, give it a shot this year. Even if you just do it with like a butternut squash. Try a three-dimensional carving. But again, always watch out for your left hand. If you're right-handed. If you're left-handed, watch out for your right hand. Whichever hand is not holding the knife, be very aware of the direction that you're pushing the knife. So if I slip right now, the knife is going to go this way. That's why I want my hand over this way. So whatever direction you're pushing the knife, that's the direction that it's going to go if you slip. Again, there's soft spots in pumpkins. Same thing if you're working with wood, you'll hit a soft spot where all of a sudden it's moving easier. You don't want a finger in the way of that. One trick that I find helps is I use my thumb on the back of the knife, because if my thumb is on the back of it, it's not in front of it, which always helps. Boy, there's a lot more that I would love to do with this, but I think I might be calling it in a minute or two. There's only so much I can do with the pocket knife and a concave pumpkin. And again, most of the carving with this is where you've got these stop cuts meeting with an undercut. You're just kind of beveling. So what I just did there, I was just taking a little bit more of a bevel on here to round things off a bit. And that will kind of fine tune your carving as you go. If you wanted to give them a chin and everything else, you could. The one downside to carving a pumpkin like this is I can't illuminate it the same way. So you can't put a candle inside of this and have it glow. I mean, you could cut a hole in the back and stick a candle in, but it actually glows the opposite way that you want. So the parts that I cut the deepest, like here and in here, those are the areas that would look the brightest, which is the opposite of what you're going for. So you kind of get a negative image of what you want if you try to illuminate a pumpkin that you've carved this way. But if you are pickling it, like I had mentioned earlier, if you find a cool jar, preferably one with a lid to keep the smell of the vinegar in. Find a cool jar, put the pumpkin or butternut squash or your sweet potato inside of that, pour the vinegar in, and then if you really want to add a special effect to it, you could take a highlighter, hit it with a hammer, shatter the highlighter, take the tube that's inside of the highlighter with the ink, squeeze the ink out into the vinegar. Now you have slightly yellow water, and then put that under a black light and your pumpkin will glow. It looks awesome. It's a super cheap special effect, but it makes any pumpkin look cooler, or a sweet potato, or butternut squash. And you can do that if you already have a black light. It's really cheap to do it. All it costs you is one highlighter. But fun little effect that you can add to your pumpkin this year. Stick it out on your front porch with a black light shining on it. Also, if you enjoy carving stuff, carve some apples and let the apples shrink in the oven. Just put them on a low setting and keep them in there for way longer than you think you need to. And as they dry out, they will slowly shrink. You can have some shrunken heads, and then you could always add those. Put those in some vinegar with black light and some highlighter. That's the kind of stuff I like to do. Much to the chagrin of my fiance. She's not as into Halloween as I am, but she lets me do it. I'm just trying to add a couple more details here to the nose because I realize the nose is kind of almost an afterthought. I didn't do a whole lot with that. Alright, and then I'm going to call it quits. That's the pumpkin for now. Alright, thank you for following along. I hope you enjoyed carving pumpkins. Don't forget, give it a shot this year. Butternut squash, sweet potato, pumpkin, apple, whatever you want to carve, go for it. Try carving three-dimensionally, just be careful of your non-cutting hand, especially your thumb. Always keep that knife going away from your fingers. Thanks for watching, have a great day.